One theme that comes up in your work is that people misunderstand what capitalism is. If you ask people to describe capitalism versus socialism, they might say capitalism is private property and markets, socialism is collectively owned property and a command economy. But you mentioned there something that is central to your analysis of what capitalism is, that is to say the nature of relationships within the workplace. So can you help us clear up what you think are some misunderstandings of what capitalism is when we're talking about it?
Very, very glad you asked the question, because it gives me a chance to say something that I think, like you just said, is core to what we're talking about. Private property, let's start with that. Private property is not unique to capitalism. It doesn't belong in a definition of capitalism. I'll take slavery as it existed in the American South before the Civil War. Did you have private slave plantations all over the place? Yes, you did. Did you have a market? Absolutely. You had a market for slaves, and you had a market for the products of slave labor. So the presence of a market and the presence of private property does not allow you to differentiate capitalism from slavery, for example, and many other systems that I could show you the same thing works. And to say that, for example, where there is collective property and where there isn't the market that we understand it, we have something other than capitalism, I would argue is equally out of order. It doesn't really make any sense. I like to remind people that the ownership of a modern corporation is a collectivity of shareholders. They together own the corporation. It isn't privately owned in the sense that usually is meant by private individuals. It is owned collectively. If you turn to the board of directors, the people who really make the core decisions, that turns out to be a collectivity as well. Usually between 15 and 25 individuals comprise a capitalist corporate board of directors. So individuality isn't a particularly definitive quality of capitalism. And let me take it another step. Some people like to think of socialism as when the government owns and operates enterprises, the way they did, particularly in the Soviet Union, the way half of the enterprises in China today are organized. And I would argue that's another mistake. Marx never said that what gets rid of capitalism is if you remove the private individuals and you substitute state officials. That would be a change.
Then monarchy would be socialism.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre idea. And I'll show you that when we do it in the university. If you teach slavery, do you tell people that the state in various slaveries owns slaves? Of course you do, because that's very well known in the historical record. Nobody in their right mind would suggest you no longer had slavery because the government coexisted with private slave owners. And the same is true of feudal plantations. So why did we develop in the West this bizarre idea that when the government does it, it's somehow a different system? No, it isn't. We ask the question, is the government functioning like an employer? And the answer is yes, it is. And therefore, there is something that Marxists have developed, the notion of state capitalism. And that's not socialism, which is a non-employer-employee arrangement, which, by the way, has existed throughout history, exists now in Britain, in America, in Europe, in China. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, except if ideologically you can't think your way through what I just said.
Yeah, you're talking there not only about misunderstandings of capitalism, but also of what a socialist system would look like. I want to just read a couple of things that you've written here. You said, I mean, one source of the misunderstanding seems to be that, as you say in Democracy at Work, most of the anti-capitalist movements that called themselves socialist in the last century did not prioritize, explicitly include, or if they came to power, institute an economic system in which the production and distribution of surplus surplus were carried out by those who produce it. And so there are lots of examples of systems that called themselves socialist, but didn't do what you argue is essential to socialism, that is to have democracy at work. And you say that any real socialism, any authentic socialism is, and I'll quote you again, a yearning by people living in a capitalist, socialism is a yearning by people living in a capitalist economic system, whether private or state capitalist, to do better than what that capitalism permits and enables. And that can mean having work that is more socially meaningful, less physically and environmentally destructive, more secure, delivering an adequate income for yourself, having the lifelong education, leisure, and civil freedom to pursue real participation in politics. Socialists want to be able to explore and develop their full potential as individuals and members of society. So these are the qualities that you think we should center when we think about what a capitalist versus socialist world would look like.
Yes, but I can also be more specific, which that book tries to do.
Yes.
In terms of the economics, it is a way of understanding what is in this country. I don't know how in European language this is handled, but in the United States, the closest concept that people understand is called a worker co-op. And the basic idea is that the people who come to do the work as individuals hired confront an employer who is themselves. The collectivity of the workers is the employer. That's how you overcome the split between employer and employee. And if you institute that, then you have gone beyond not just capitalism, but the slavery and the feudalism, because those are the three systems, unlike earlier village systems and so forth, that we also know are alternatives. It's the feudalism, the slavery, and the capitalism that are the exemplars of the dichotomy between those who make the decisions and sit at the top and who are rich versus those who do the work and sit at the bottom and are not rich. And the socialist dream, therefore, was not just to go beyond capitalism, but to go beyond any system that incorporates that split, because that split makes it impossible to realize liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Yeah, one thing that Marx was criticized for often was not providing a clear enough explanation of what alternative structures to capitalism might look like. And it's one of the things that you've tried to do in your work is fill that gap and say, well, okay, well, if we've analyzed what this system looked like, what could alternatives look like, and give people a real picture of that.
Yes, exactly. Listen. You're making me feel very good because you're explaining to me that I got across what I was hoping to get across.
Well, I hope so. I want to hit you with the most common defense of capitalism, though, which is people might admit that it does not provide equality. It does not provide fraternity. Certainly, I don't think anyone would argue it provides fraternity. But I mean, even the Adam Smith quote about the butcher and the baker kind of assumes that there is no fraternity and we don't need fraternity because our self-interest is going to produce prosperity for all. But what they would say is, yes, but you can't argue against what it produces, which is prosperity, which is a vast outpouring of wealth. There's often some version of a chart showing, that human wealth or exploded, in a certain amount. I'm sure you see the chart where GDP, explodes with the onset of capitalism. You say that there are billionaires next to people suffering poverty where you are in New York, but also look at all the, look at New York of today versus New York in 1850.
Absolutely. It's a well-rehearsed, often heard argument from a wide variety of people. So, yes, I acknowledge absolutely this argument. Here's my response. I find it a clever maneuver of the defenders of capitalism to make that argument. And the reason why I feel that way is that every one of the gains they refer to, whether it be in the diet or the work conditions or the housing quality or the schooling, whatever it is, what was unique And that's true in the history of England. It's true in the history of the United States. It's true of the history of the world today. Capitalists were always against it. They had to be fought against massive opposition to grant any of these things. If you look, I'm going to give you an example, but there are so many we could spend the next 10 hours doing, but I'm going to give you one. Here in the United States, I don't think you have this in England, or maybe I'm wrong. We have an official legal minimum wage. The federal government started in the Great Depression, the 1930s, to pass laws mandating a minimum wage. Okay? So we've had that since, to be exact, 1938, so almost a century. It was passed under enormous pressure from below, from the union movement in the United States, the CIO, during the 1930s, abetted by two socialist and one communist party, and they all worked together, and they got the president. They threatened the president, Franklin Roosevelt, that he wouldn't be president much longer unless he did this. And he was smart enough to understood they were not bluffing him. His political career depended on it, so he went to work and he got the bill passed. It took him years, during which the opposition was the capitalist class of the United States, the chambers of commerce, that's their official organization, and subgroups of them and industrial groups of them fought it. They delayed it. They were very successful. The idea had been around for decades. They had postponed it, blocked it, delayed it, diluted it. Finally, it passed. Okay. Did their opposition stop then? Not at all. I'll give you the latest stage. The last time the Congress looked at and passed on the minimum wage was in the year 2009. And it was then set at $7.25 per hour, which is what it is now, as I'm speaking to you. So we have had 16 years of a minimum wage at $7.25. During every one of those 16 years, the price level in this country went up, sometimes as little as 1 or 2%, sometimes as high as 9 or 10%. But we never raised the minimum wage. And why not? We had Republican presidents and Democrats in the Congress, in the White House. But one thing the two parties managed to do was to savage the people living on a minimum wage. It is extraordinary. Then the only thing more extraordinary than the history I've just summarized is the clever Madison Avenue advertising move by the capitalists who blocked it, who delayed it, who postponed it, and who minimized it, to turn around and want the rest of us to applaud them for doing it. Wow. You either have to be very ignorant of what happened or very needy of finding an argument you can hold on to.
Now, it seems like what you're saying there is, in response to this argument of all the wondrous things that capitalism has delivered, that it's claiming credit for things that it doesn't deserve. That if you look at public health, the sewer system, electrification, public education, minimum wages, workplace safety, a lot of innovations,
8-hour day.
Capitalism doesn't deserve credit. These things occurred in spite of capitalism due to the struggles of workers. Thanks for watching. This video is a product of Current Affairs Magazine, the country's leading independent left print magazine based here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Go to currentaffairs.org to find out more about us, and currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our absolutely gorgeous bi-monthly print edition. Get it in your mailbox. You can also subscribe to the Current Affairs News Briefing, the Current Affairs Podcast, or you can subscribe to our digital edition. Current Affairs is entirely reader-supported. We have no ads. We have no corporate backers. We depend on you. So please consider purchasing a subscription or making a donation to Current Affairs today. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization, and your donations are tax-deductible to the extent allowable by law. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.